In 1960, a teenage girl was out camping with 3 of her friends when she woke to the sound of footsteps at about 4 in the morning. Due to the isolation of their campsite, she immediately knew something was wrong. She tried to shake her friends awake, who groggily sat up, questioning what was going on. Before she could answer, something hard swung through the side of the tent, striking one of the teenagers with potentially lethal force. They desperately tried to scramble out of the entrance, but the attacker kept swinging, forcing them to stay put. The attacker then pulled out a knife and once again started slashing at the tent. After a few swipes, there was enough of an opening for the teenagers to fight back. They tried their absolute hardest, but being caught off guard and tangled in the remnants of a 4-person tent didn't give them much of a fair fight. But one of the boys, Niels Gustafsson, caught a glimpse of the attacker. He was a man dressed in black with what appeared to be bright red eyes. Before he could get a closer look, the attacker struck him in the head and knocked him out. Gustafsson was found unconscious the next morning with severe facial fractures and defensive wounds. His 3 friends didn't survive. Due to the brutal and traumatic manner of the attack, he had suffered amnesia. The details told through this story were mainly recalled through either evidence analysis or hypnotherapy, which has a shaky reputation at best. And decades later, the police realized that his story was highly suspicious. He was the only survivor and didn't have nearly as many knife wounds as his friends did. Additionally, his shoes were found partially hidden about 500 meters away with his friend's blood all over them. This led to a trial, which ultimately found him not guilty. But if Niels didn't do it, then who did? Well, one person noticed that in this photo of one of the teenagers' funerals, there appears to be a man who nearly perfectly matches the police sketch. Despite this, nobody could confidently identify him. One of the more interesting suspects was Hans Assmann, who reportedly visited a hospital the next morning with blood all over his clothes. Additionally, he was connected to another unsolved murder. However, he would later be proven to have lied about several major details of his life and had an alibi. Despite having several intriguing suspects, the police never conclusively found the killer.
April Millsap was a 14-year-old girl that was murdered in 2014 in a small town in Michigan, and she actually helped solve her own murder because of a fitness tracker app she was using at the time of the crime. It's 2014 in the small town called Armada. At the time of the crime, and I think even now, the population is under 2,000 people, so very, very small village, and it's a generally safe area. In 2016, it was reported that they only had 2 full-time police officers. There were some that were part-time, but very small area, everyone sort of knew everyone, and it was considered very safe. April lived there with her mom, stepdad, and she had a boyfriend she'd been dating around 1.5 years named Austin. He didn't live with them, but he was a pretty big part of her life. April lived a very normal life. She went to school. All her friends describe her as really sweet and nice. She was also really into health and fitness, and she had several pets. Her favorite, I guess you could say, was Penny. Penny and April did everything together. They were best friends and they would go out on walks, hikes, runs all the time together. July 24th, 2014, beautiful summer day. April decides that she wants to take Penny out for a walk, which is not unusual. She takes Penny out for hikes all the time. However, she never stays out past dark. As soon as the sun starts to set, she usually makes her way back home. So she left around 5:30 p.m. Her mom calls her when the sun starts to go down to see when she's going to be home. She doesn't respond. A few hours go by. The mom tries calling over and over again, and she cannot get a hold of April. By 9 p.m., she decides to call the police, let them know that April's missing. The police are with her. She starts freaking out. She says she just had a really bad gut feeling that something had happened, and she goes to call the stepdad because he's at work to fill him in and let him know what's going on. She can't even get the words out. The cops actually have to take the phone from her and let the stepdad know what's going on, so then he leaves work and goes home to be with his wife. The police are talking to the mom, trying to get more information on both her life, like her friends, her day-to-day, her boyfriend, as well as specifics of the day, like what she was wearing, if she said where she was going, if she has different trails that she usually sticks to try and see where they should be looking. The cops tell the mom to call her boyfriend, Austin, to see if maybe she said anything to him about where she was going. And he says, it's around 9:30 p.m. now, but he says that at 7 p.m., April texted Austin and said, "I think I almost got kidnapped." So this is now a more serious case. Obviously, April was scared enough to text her boyfriend of someone on the trail, and now she can't be found. The team of police officers in the village is obviously very small, so they bring in the FBI to help them out with the investigation. They go back to the station to try and figure out a game plan, and when they do, they get a 911 call from a man that says he was riding his bike with his wife on that trail. A dog comes up to them, and it seems like the dog was trying to take them somewhere, so the man follows the dog, who ends up being Penny, April's dog. The dog walks up to a dead body and just lays next to the dead body and starts whimpering, which is so sad. When the police go out to look at the body, it was pretty much confirmed that it was April because it matched the outfit exactly like what the mom said she had been wearing earlier in the day. It was very clear that whatever happened was very violent. She was found with a pile of blood under her head. She was laying in a ditch around 20 feet away from the trail. She was partially undressed, so her pants were pulled down to her knees, and then her shirt was ripped open, so her entire body was exposed. She also had footprints on her head and her neck. Just stepping all over someone after you've killed them is beyond me. The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head that caused a brain bleed along with strangulation. It was also found that she had 48 separate injuries, so very, very violent. The town is obviously freaking out. They're upset. They're full of fear. A girl was found dead, and whoever did that to her is just out there and they don't know who it is. The FBI, again, is involved, and they're working with the police to try and come up with a timeline of events based on the evidence that they had. This is what police believe to have happened. April is out walking Penny. An older man comes up to her, tries to flirt with her. April is like, no, thank you. She starts walking away, and that's when she texts her boyfriend and says, I think I almost got kidnapped. They believe the man comes up to her again and is now angry because he's been rejected, hits her in the back of the head, and then takes her to the ditch and beats her to death. Because of the text that she sent her boyfriend, they were able to track the phone and see exactly where she was standing. And they believe the attack happened somewhere between 6:30 to 6:45 p.m. The police are trying to talk to the public to see if anyone saw or heard anything. They're reaching out saying, if you were at this trail around this time, let us know. And a man does come forward and says that he saw a young girl that matched the description of April walking around that time. He also saw an older man on a blue and white motorcycle. So that blue and white motorcycle is pretty much the only lead, the only solid lead that they have now. And they did end up finding her phone a couple miles away from the crime scene. They just thought that the killer must have taken it with them and then ditched it. When they turn on April's phone, they see that she had the fitness tracker on while she was on her walk, and they're able to see her exact movements, the speed she was walking at, where she was walking, all the details. With that information, they pull up the times that her phone was moving around and the timeline that they believed to be true, and they compared the two. This is really sad because it gives you an idea of what she went through, but the minute that she texted her boyfriend that she almost got kidnapped, you see her fitness tracker app turn around like she's gonna start walking back home, and she starts walking faster. When she started walking faster, she was probably trying to get away from whoever had scared her, and then her location says it's still moving, but then all of a sudden it stops moving, and it's like it's in the same spot, but it's kind of going back and forth, and that's when it is believed that there was a struggle and she was trying to fight back, and then it moves away at 20 miles per hour, meaning it was fast enough that it had to be a different mode of transportation, not just walking, but not fast enough to be a car. So that would match the lead that they have of the blue and white motorcycle. Again, this is a pretty small town, so the cops are going around asking if anyone owns a blue and white motorcycle or if they know anyone that does. A woman comes forward and says that her neighbor does own a blue and white motorcycle, but that she actually hasn't seen it in a while. And the time that she stopped seeing the motorcycle was around the time of the murder. So the cops go and figure out who these neighbors are that own this motorcycle, and it is a dad and a son. Both of their names are James Van Callis. The dad is 66 years old, and the son is, I think he was 33, I could be mistaken though, but around his 30s, and he had a girlfriend and a little 3-year-old boy, so they lived in the house as well. Both Jameses had criminal records. James, the dad, was a registered, and his victims were girls under the age of 13. James, the son, also had a criminal record of breaking and entering, things of that nature. Police get a search warrant to search their house, and they're specifically trying to look for / find the bike. They also want to find the shoes that match the footprints at the crime scene. They were Nike Jordans. They're not able to find the bike or the shoes or really any other evidence that connected them to April, but they did find evidence that, one, they had a motorcycle, for example, helmets, bike, riding suits, and they also found a picture of James the son wearing those kind of shoes, but the actual things were nowhere to be found. What they did find were, so they arrested them on those charges, and they were tactical with the arrest. They arrested them on the charges, but they didn't mention anything about April yet because they didn't want to scare them off. So they take both Jameses to the station. They're questioning both of them. They take DNA samples and they test it against the DNA found on the crime scene. However, there is no match. But it is theorized that James, the son, which is the one that is believed to have committed the murder because it was his bike, he would put on like the bike suits, like the really tight, they almost look like surfing water suits. He would go out on bike rides. So it's theorized that because he probably had one of those on, he didn't get any of his DNA on April, but there would have probably been April's DNA on whatever outfit he was wearing. So the cops are focusing more on James, the son, because he is the owner of the motorcycle and they think that he was the one that did it. And again, their theory is that someone came up to April and was trying to flirt with them. Then they got mad when April rejected them, and that's why they hit and killed April. They look at James's, the son, his search history, and there's a lot about young girls, such as, why don't these young girls like me? Why don't they want me? So the cops have the idea that whoever did that to April was mad because they were rejected, and James literally Googling, why don't these girls like me, these young girls like me, would match up with their theory. The Google searches basically just confirmed that James had already had those thoughts of, oh, I'm into these young girls and I get mad when they don't like me back. James is finally arrested on first-degree murder and assault with the intent. In court, his defense says that they don't have any actual evidence confirming that it was him that did the crime. There's no DNA. It's all basically circumstantial evidence. However, again, it is believed that he was probably wearing one of those biking outfits when he did it, which is why there wouldn't be any of his DNA on her. The prosecution brings up James's girlfriend to the stand, and she says that when the cops first went to their house after they left, James went up to her and said, I really messed up really bad. You're gonna have to stick by me on this. And if anyone asks, tell them that the night of the murder, I was wearing this other different kind of brand of shoe, not Nike Jordans, which is the ones that would have been found at the crime scene. But like, actually so sus. The cops show up, so you know something serious is going on, and then your boyfriend comes up to you and says, I really messed up, please cover for me. Obviously that's suspicious. She also says that the day of the murder, he left around 4:30 p.m. and then he was home by 9 p.m., which the cops thought that April was murdered between 6:30 to 6:45, so that would match up. The girlfriend says they fell asleep. She wakes up and realizes that he's gone again. She goes downstairs around 3 in the morning and finds James cleaning his helmet and his shoes with hand sanitizer. It's 3 in the morning, sir. Obviously, you're doing something suspicious if you are cleaning your shoes with hand sanitizer in the middle of the night. After James is being so weird and telling her to cover in case the cops ask anything else, she's freaked out, so she goes and looks through his backpack. I don't know if it was his helmet. She finds something with clumps of long hair that didn't match her hair color, but hair that matched April's hair color. In court, 2 witnesses also said that they saw James and April on the trail and that James was walking behind April, like 2 feet behind her, looking very angry, and April was looking very nervous. In 2016, James was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison. Since then, he has tried to appeal his sentence multiple times, but it's been rejected a lot. And to this day, James and his whole family maintain his innocence and say that he didn't do it and he was framed. I personally think that he did it. I mean, cops go to your house, you then go up to your girlfriend and say, I messed up, please cover for me. You're washing your helmet and your shoes at 3 in the morning with hand sanitizer. You did something bad, and there was a girl found dead where you were with your motorcycle. That's my opinion, but let me know what you think. All right, love you. Go kiss someone that you love on the forehead and make somebody happy today. Also, if you go out on a walk or run, maybe literally share your location with every single person that you know and just stay safe. Okay.
People are calling this case the Incest House of Horrors. This case comes with just about the biggest trigger warning for the most horrific things you could hear. It was October 2023 in the quiet Polish village called Koniki. An arrest was about to happen which would shake the small community. The true horrors of what had been going on under everyone's noses were absolutely chilling. Piotr Girasik was 54 years old. He and his wife Hannah had had a staggering 12 children together. Hannah had passed away 15 years prior, leaving Peter to look after the children on his own. Now, the house that he lived in was far from ideal for such a huge family. Locals were also often concerned about hearing cries and screaming from inside the home. They knew Peter had a close relationship with his 20-year-old daughter, Paulina, but they had no idea just how disturbing things were getting inside the home. That was until local workers at a cake shop nearby tipped off social services. They had serious concerns about what was going on in the property, and they were right to be worried. When officers arrived at the home, they could smell something absolutely potent. Upon closer inspection of the property, they found decomposing dead babies in the basement. 2 of the tiny bodies were wrapped in plastic bags and one was just lying on the floor. Now, at the time of the discovery, Peter wasn't actually living in this house with all 12 of his children. Some had escaped. He was living in the house with his daughter Paulina and his disabled son Damien. It would later be revealed that sometimes Damien was seen sat outside the house crying. He told officers that his dad would have S with his sister, so the dad's daughter, and regularly chase Damien out the house and beat him when he wanted to do this. Damien was abused and was given little more than cold rice to live off. Horrifically, police discovered that the deceased babies in the basement were actually the product of incest. The 3 babies found in the cellar were believed to have been killed just after they were born. Frustratingly, Peter had actually been on the radar of police. He'd been investigated 5 times over allegations of incest. He was arrested finally by police, and his daughter Paulina was also arrested. Thankfully, many of Peter's children had managed to flee, and his one daughter, Cassia, referred to him as a monster. He's now facing charges of murder, incest, and R.
She was buried alive by her boyfriend and his roommate. It was September 17, 2003, and police had just discovered human remains covered in a tar-like substance in the wooded hills of Applegate, California. At this point, the remains are pretty decomposed, and police are thinking that it has to do with the tar-like substance that was poured over this body. Police eventually are able to identify the remains as belonging to 17-year-old Justine Vandershoot, who was reported missing just 2 weeks earlier. On September 2, 2003, Justine's mother, Lynette, woke up and actually found that Justine wasn't home that morning. Their back door was open and Justine's truck was gone. Lynette actually tries to call Justine, but Justine doesn't answer, and at first Lynette is thinking maybe she's with her boyfriend or her friends. Later that afternoon, Justine's 17-year-old boyfriend Daniel Bessemer actually calls Lynette and asks if she knows where Justine was, and this immediately made Lynette panic because she realized if her daughter wasn't with her boyfriend and he wasn't able to get a hold of her, where was she? So Lynette actually calls her husband Don and their older daughter Christine along with Justine's friends, but nobody knew where Justine was, so her family goes to the police and they report her missing. Police start by talking with Justine's older sister, Christine, because Christine had been on the phone with her sister just the night before. She tells investigators that her and Justine just talked about daily life things and there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Police then bring in Justine's boyfriend and he tells him that he went to her house the night before and on his way home he stopped by 7-Eleven to buy a soda, but that was the last time he saw her. Daniel tells police that the day she went missing, he actually went to her school and the doctor's office she worked at to look for her, but he couldn't find her, and police are able to confirm this. They actually bring in Daniel's 20-year-old roommate, Brandon Fernandez, and he tells police that he and Daniel were alone in their apartment that night and they hadn't left. At this point, investigators don't have any real leads, and Justine's family starts putting up flyers all over town in hopes that someone has seen Justine. They even travel the roads in the area because they're thinking maybe Justine has been involved in a car accident. On September 3rd, Justine's truck was found in a park and ride lot just a few miles from her home. There were no keys in her truck, no notes, nothing. The truck looked as it was locked and parked, and then she just disappeared. By this time, her family holds a vigil at the park and ride site, and police set up surveillance to see if a possible suspect was in attendance, and they actually noticed a stranger that was pacing back and forth and smoking at the vigil. Police identify this guy and they question him, and it turns out this man had actually lost his daughter and was there because he put a plaque up for his daughter at this park and ride, and he wanted to support Justine and her family. So ultimately, he was cleared as a suspect as well. Almost 2 weeks into Justine's disappearance, investigators spoke with her friends again, and they find that Justine and Daniel's relationship was actually very rocky. They actually find out out that Justine had actually met someone months earlier during a spring break getaway. Her friends didn't really know the guy other than he was in the Navy and his name was Dave. Police are able to track him down, bring him in for questioning, and they find out that he and Justine actually had broken off all communication in August, and they were able to rule him out as a suspect. With no other real suspects, police start to zero in on her boyfriend Daniel Bessemer, and they thought maybe he found out about her fling and was jealous, and this enraged him to the point of doing something to her. Not only was Daniel and Justine's relationship rocky, but Daniel's roommate Brandon and Justine also had tension between them because Justine knew that Brandon was cheating on his girlfriend. So they look closer into this alibi that the boys gave police, and they find it doesn't hold up. The night Justine disappeared, Brandon and Daniel actually had two friends from Alabama at their apartment, and these friends did try to corroborate this alibi that Brandon and Daniel gave, but it quickly fell apart, and one of the friends agreed to cooperate with investigators. First, they bring in Brandon, and they actually bring in an FBI profiler as well, and this is when Brandon comes clean. Brandon says that Daniel was angry that Justine had cheated on him, and he enlisted Brandon to use his tech skills to actually tap into Justine's phone and record her calls. So every single time Justine was calling this man she met on spring break, Daniel was on the other side listening because Brandon had tapped into her phone. Brandon also says that they came up with this plan to get Justine to meet them at the park and ride the night she disappeared. When she arrived, she hopped into Brandon's car with both him and Daniel. When they start driving, they put in this mixtape that the two made, and there were pieces of her recorded phone calls plugged in between songs, and they just played this until they reached a wooded area. Brandon claims he then gets out of a car, walks away, and he hears a scream. Brandon says when he returned to the car, he saw Justine on the ground next to a taser. The two of them dug a grave to put her in and poured a solution on her to make her decomposition a little bit quicker. Cover her with dirt and a discarded mattress that was in the area, and then they leave and act like nothing happened. Realizing that Brandon had just implicated himself in the murder, he tried to make a deal with police, and he said that he would take them to where she was buried, and he did, and that is where they find Justine's remains covered in the black tar-like substance. Through an autopsy, they're able to determine that there was evidence of strangulation, but Justine was not dead when she went into that grave. She was still alive. We were able to find dirt in her stomach to confirm this. In the end, both Brandon and Daniel were offered plea deals, which the Vandershoots agreed to in order to get their closure, and Brandon was sentenced to 15 years to life, and Daniel was sentenced to 25 years to life. This case is disturbing, it's heartbreaking, and it's just so sad because this girl trusted her boyfriend and then he took advantage of that, and ultimately she was buried alive by two people she thought she could trust.
This case is so strange that I don't even know if this is real or not. The information is so, scarce, but let's talk about the information that I have found. So a very short video was made about this on TikTok, and I thought I'd do a little bit of research, and the research that I did, I literally found 3 articles. In January of 2012, teachers at a Riverwoods public school in Sydney, Australia discovered a huge amount of blood in their school, cubby playhouse thing. When police sampled the blood, they believed that it belonged to a young male. The only actual clue that anything had happened was the pool of blood found in the clubhouse, so they opened a murder investigation. In total, there was believed to be about 1.5 litres of blood in the clubhouse. It's believed that this happened somewhere between the 13th and 29th of January 2012. Police had looked through missing persons databases, hospital records, anything that they could, to try and find who this blood belonged to and why there was no body. And there was no record of anyone being treated for significant blood loss at a hospital, and there was no deaths in the area that would relate to this around that time. And to this day, police have no idea how the blood got into the cubby house, why it was there, who did it, who belonged to, no idea. Which makes me think that maybe this could have been a prank of some sort, but DNA testing of the blood proved that it was human and that it was male. So I don't know, this one really has me stumped. but it's been well over a decade and no other information on this case has been released.
Every aspect of this case is deeply unsettling, to say the least. Today I want to talk about the case of 17-year-old Michelle Avila. So Michelle often went by the nickname Missy, which is what I'll be referring to her as for the entirety of this video. And Missy grew up in Los Angeles, California. Her parents were divorced, and because of this, she primarily lived with her mom Irene as well as her 3 brothers. Missy was described as outgoing and very bubbly. She had a really great personality, and everyone agreed that she was very pretty. Her looks caught the attention of many, including the boys at school, which unfortunately sparked jealousy among the girls she went to school with. This attention that Missy got from the boys led to a wave of drama because some girls felt that they needed to bully her or spread unkind rumors just because they let the jealousy get the best of them. Despite all of the bullying, the rumors, Missy had one friend who stood by her side, sticking up for her, and that was her best friend, Karen Severson. Karen and Missy had been best friends since the time they were 8 years old. They grew up on the same street, and Karen would often fight people who tried to cross Missy, and because of this, Missy called Karen her bodyguard. It was like a little inside joke that they had together. Missy was not the only one who was getting bullied. She also stuck up for Karen because Karen unfortunately was picked on for her looks as well. She was a bit taller than most of her classmates, was described by some as a little heavier. It was just kids being cruel. Although the girls seemed to really be the best of friends, things changed when at the age of 14, Karen became pregnant. Karen dropped out of school for the duration of her pregnancy, which in her mind caused her and Missy to grow more distant. After giving birth to her baby, Karen went back to school while her mom and grandma cared for the baby, and any hope that returning to school would rekindle her and Missy's friendship kind of disappeared. Karen felt like Missy wasn't giving her the same attention she once did. She felt like Missy was prioritizing boys or other people over their friendship, and this hurt her feelings. So much so that she started going behind Missy's back and spreading rumors that Missy was sleeping with many boys at the school. And this was a problem because these boys had girlfriends who were upset at this rumor. They couldn't see past the idea that it was likely a rumor, and as a result, they beat Missy up. And Missy was really confused as to where these rumors were coming from. A classmate actually came to her and told her that Karen was the one who started the rumors. Of course, Missy didn't believe it. Despite whatever Karen felt towards their friendship, Missy still believed that Karen was one of her best friends. She didn't think that Karen, the person who once beat people up who tried to make fun of her, was capable of starting these rumors. Fast forward to junior year of high school when Missy began dating a boy named Randy, and their relationship only lasted a month because Randy was constantly partying. Missy definitely hung out with a crowd of people who liked to party, but Randy's constant partying put a strain on their relationship, causing her to break things off with him. It did not take long for Karen to swoop right in and begin dating Randy, her best friend's ex-boyfriend. And the relationship between Karen and Randy seemed to move pretty quickly. They seemed to like each other. They ended up moving into an apartment together that basically became the party spot for all of their friends. It was actually at one of these parties when Karen looked over and saw that Randy and Missy were talking to one another, and then Randy pulled Missy into his lap. Missy, who wanted no part in this, yelled at Randy, telling him to get off of her, not to touch her. She even told Karen that Randy did not seem like a great guy. She should end her relationship with him if he was doing things like this. Karen didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to blame Randy for his actions. Instead, she wanted to blame Missy for the way that Randy acted. And once again, this kind of left Karen feeling like Missy was trying to steal her boyfriend, even though she wasn't. She just continued to harbor this hatred for Missy. At some point, Karen became close with a girl named Laura Doyle. Laura was in the same grade as Karen and Missy. She actually lived on the same street as them. And depending on who you ask, people will say that all 3 of the girls became very close. However, it really seemed like Laura and Karen acted like they were friends with Missy, and then they'd go behind her back and talk badly about her. And that's kind of what makes this case confusing. Were they friends? Were they not friends? There's a lot of switch up and back and forth between these 3 girls. More so on Karen and Laura's side, I don't think Missy was aware that her friends were talking behind her back, spreading rumors about her. On September 23rd, 1985, just 10 days before Missy's disappearance, she and Karen got into a physical altercation at a park where Karen threatened to hit Missy with a beer bottle and then pushed her down and began hitting her. Missy did tell her mom Irene about this incident. She was very close with her mom. She always told her about the fights that her and Karen got into, so when Missy disappeared, Irene didn't really connect this fight with her daughter's disappearance. She just figured that it was another one of those misunderstandings. On October 2nd, 1985, Missy told her mom Irene that she was going to hang out with a friend, and that friend was Laura Doyle. Irene remembered that Laura did in fact pick Missy up around 3:30 p.m. The 2 of them seemed to be laughing and smiling. The girls were supposed to go out to a park and hang out, and this park in particular was located inside the Angeles National Forest. It was a place that Missy and her friends frequently went out to, and Missy told Irene she would call her around 8 p.m. to check in, but Irene never got that call. Instead, 4 hours later, around 6 p.m., Laura called Irene and asked to speak with Missy. And Irene Irene was confused. She thought Missy was with Laura. That was the plan. However, Laura told Irene she dropped Missy off at the park with 3 unknown boys while she went to go get gas. And when she got back from getting gas, Missy and the boys were just gone. She told Irene that the boys were driving a blue Camaro, but other than that, she didn't know who they were. So Irene waited up all night hoping that Missy would come back, and when she didn't, she went to the police and reported her daughter as a missing person, telling them the story that Laura gave her. Unfortunately, just days after Irene reported her daughter missing, on October 4th, Missy's body was discovered in a stream inside the Angeles National Forest. Missy had been forcibly drowned in about 6 to 8 inches of water. Her once waist-length hair was chopped off and her body was pinned down by a 4-foot log. When authorities notified Irene that her daughter was found and no longer alive, Irene reportedly collapsed before they could tell her the entire story, and 3 days later, she fainted again at Missy's funeral and had to be rushed to the emergency room while the funeral was still going on. Laura and Karen both attended the funeral, where afterwards, Laura sent Irene a sympathy card with $20. Despite the differences that Laura and Karen once had with Missy, both of the girls really came together with Irene, comforting her and doing everything they could to assist Irene in searching for Missy's killer. And Karen became very, very close with Irene. She was like a second daughter to her. She told Irene that she was going to do anything she could do to catch the animal who killed her friend. According to Irene, Karen even moved in with her and her sons for 3 months. She became obsessed with the case while she lived there. She hung up newspaper clippings and pictures of Missy on the walls, seemingly trying to connect the dots. Now, Karen denied that she ever moved in with Irene. She said she just visited the family frequently, but she did visit Missy's grave 2 or 3 times a week. She even began to frequent the location where Missy's body was found, just sitting there drinking beer alongside the stream. Police were trying to track down any lead relating to a blue Camaro in hopes of finding the person who killed Missy. However, 2 years after the start of the investigation, Karen announced that Laura wanted to change her story. That is when Laura told Irene and the police that she lied about the night Missy went missing. She said there was no Camaro, and the truth was she had dropped Missy off near a church to deliver $500 to a drug dealer. She just didn't want to mention the drug dealer and instead fabricated a different lie. So police started to look at this new lead, and while they were doing that, Karen started to tell everyone that she was having visions of an apparition floating over her bed at night, and she believed that these were visions of Missy. During a visit with Irene, Karen gasped and cried out, saying that Missy was sitting on the couch. It was her ghost. She really thought that she was seeing Missy's ghost. By July of 1988, whatever charade Karen and Laura had going on came to a halt when one of Karen's friends, Eva, went to police with a completely different story. Eva said that on October 2nd, Laura did in fact pick Missy up. However, Eva and Karen were following them in a separate car all the way out to the park where Missy's body was later found. She said Laura, Missy, and Karen all got out of the car and started walking into a wooded area towards the stream while Eva stayed behind in the car. According to Karen, the 3 girls walked into the woodline towards the stream and Missy sat down. At some point, Laura and Karen began cutting chunks out of Missy's hair, and then Laura got into the water and told Missy to get in as well. Missy refused, so Karen pushed her into the water, where she says that Laura began holding Missy under, and Karen decided to just walk back to the car while Laura finished drowning Missy. Karen and Laura were both arrested and charged with Missy's murder, and this was shocking to not only Irene, who felt like these girls were trying to genuinely help her and comfort her after her daughter's death, but also to the police arresting them. Because not once during the police's investigation did Karen ever insinuate that she had a deep hatred for Missy. They never thought she was a suspect. She seemed like a grieving friend who was willing to do anything to help. Now, it was believed that the reason they did this was, first of all, Karen was extremely jealous of Missy. She was pretty and popular, and many people felt like Karen was obsessed with Missy. If anyone tried to be friends with her, it was like Karen tried to make sure that didn't happen. It was also said that Laura's boyfriend had recently left her. Irene believed that Karen had planted it into Laura's head that Missy was to blame for her boyfriend leaving her, although Missy didn't have anything to do with that. Both Laura and Karen were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life. The jury stated that they were not convinced the murder was planned and rejected the first-degree murder charge. Karen was released from prison on December 9th, 2011 after serving 21.5 years, and Laura was released in December of 2012 after serving 22 years. After their release, there hasn't been much word from Laura. However, Karen went on to release 2 separate books, and a documentary was once in the works. After the release of the second book in 2014, Karen said she wanted to donate a portion of the profits from both the book and the documentary to an anti-bullying campaign. Those who have read the book say that Karen shows no remorse and portrays herself as a victim. Now, I don't believe that documentary was ever released because Missy's family ended up suing Karen and the book's distributor in 2015 for slander and infliction of emotional distress, and Karen no longer receives any profits from that book. This actually prompted the creation of Missy's Law in California, which requires companies that work with criminals criminals to notify victims and their families about their projects. Missy's family did not want criminals, especially Karen, to profit from their crimes. So yeah, both Laura and Karen were released from prison. Karen maintains that she is a different person. They were 17 when these crimes occurred. She did her time. I don't know. This case is really sad. Yes, they were only 17 years old, but they let jealousy get the best of them and they murdered their friend because they were jealous.
In 1987, a couple woke up to a masked man standing at the foot of their bed at roughly 4 a.m. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out 4 sets of handcuffs before demanding that they lie on their stomach and cuff their wrists and ankles. He whispered, "Be quiet and don't move or I'll hurt someone." Since he was armed, the couple had no choice but to comply. The intruder then left the master bedroom and gently woke up their 7-year-old son and 11-year-old daughter. He then calmly walked them back to their parents' bedroom. He seemed to be confidently and precisely following an exact set of steps, although at this point the family was still unaware of his motive. Once he rounded up all the family members in the master bedroom, he finally communicated his plan. He stated that this was a simple robbery and asked for clothes, money, and food, but the family had a bad feeling. After all, this seemed like a lot of work just for a simple burglary. However, the parents had no choice but to comply. The intruder taped their mouths shut and blindfolded the kids before forcing the parents into their wardrobe and barricading it shut with furniture. He then used their bedroom phone to make a call, but his conversation was largely unintelligible. He then took the daughter to a separate room and assaulted her before thoroughly bathing her. Afterward, the intruder left for the kitchen to have some of their leftovers and milk. He finally left the home through the front door at about 6 a.m., meaning that this entire ordeal lasted about 2 hours. This was only the first attack of several, and news outlets soon gave him the moniker of Mr. Cruel. Despite the creation of a task force dedicated solely to finding him, his identity remains unknown to this day.
They weren't answering any of their phone calls, any of their text messages, and no one seemed to know where they were at. Today we're discussing the case of Bart and Krista Halderson. Bart and Krista lived in Windsor, Wisconsin. They had 2 sons, Mitchell and Chandler, and this seemed to be a very close-knit and loving family. Bart and Krista enjoyed spending time not only together, but also with their sons and their 2 dogs, Izzy and Rizzo. By 2021, the Haldersons were living this quiet yet very fulfilling life. Their oldest son, Mitchell, was 24 years old. He was working in tech and engaged to be married. And their youngest son, Chandler, was 23. He was going to school for IT, and he was looking forward to a job he had lined up at SpaceX. It seemed like the Haldersons had everything going for them. They had 2 successful sons, a beautiful home, and a life that they loved. However, this came to a halt on July 2nd, 2021, when Krista Halderson did not show up for work. This immediately raised concern for one of her co-workers, Daniel. It was unusual not only for Krista to miss a day, but also because she hadn't mentioned she was taking the day off. And Daniel was more than just a co-worker. He was a very close family friend who spoke with Krista regularly. He felt certain she would have said something if she wasn't coming in that day. After calling Krista multiple times and getting no response, Daniel and his girlfriend drove out to the Halderson home hoping to find Krista and Bart. When they arrived, the house was very quiet. Daniel looked through one of the windows where he saw a coffee table turned on its side, and when he went over to the garage to peek through that window, he saw that both Krista and Bart's cars were still parked inside. Just as Daniel was about to go around to the back of the house to check into those windows, Chandler, Bart and Krista's youngest son, came out of the home. He was wrapped in a towel and told Daniel he had just gotten out of the shower and was confused as to what was going on. So Daniel explained they were looking for his parents. He mentioned that Krista hadn't come to work, so they wanted to make sure that everything was okay. And Chandler told him not to worry. His parents had left that morning to head up to their family cabin for an emergency. They didn't have great service up there, so that's probably why his mom wasn't answering any of her calls, which I'm sure provided a little bit of relief to Daniel, but any relief that Daniel may have had quickly disappeared when the weekend came and went without a word from Bart or Krista. The only person who claimed to have been in contact with them was Chandler. Krista did not show up for work the following Monday or Tuesday. Then she missed a very important doctor's appointment, and by Wednesday, July 7th, Daniel encouraged Chandler to go to the police and report his parents missing, which he did. He walked into the sheriff's office and explained that his parents had gone to their family cabin for the 4th of July weekend. They were picked up and driven out there by a couple he did not know. Now they weren't answering any of their phone calls, any of their text messages, and no one seemed to know where they were at. Decided to head over to the Halderson home and check it out for themselves, and Chandler was with them on the first floor walking around, pointing out things that his parents had taken with them when they went up to the cabin. Chandler seemed to be certain about his parents' whereabouts, but no one else in Bart and Krista's lives, not even their other son Mitchell, knew of this abrupt weekend getaway or about this emergency up at the family cabin. After hearing the news that his parents were missing, Mitchell and his fiance decided to drive the 3 hours up to the cabin, and there was no sign of his parents, no sign of anyone. And when police arrived to the cabin to help assist assist in the search, they confirmed Bart and Krista were not at this cabin, and it looked like no one had been in this cabin for a very long time. Everyone was just kind of scratching their heads at this point. You have this couple that disappeared together, leaving behind pretty much everything, and the only person who knows anything is their son, Chandler. To just give you a little bit of a background on Chandler, he seemed to be a good kid. He was going to college, he had a lot of friends, he at one point was living in an apartment with one of these friends, and he had this longtime girlfriend named Kat. Although Chandler had this longtime girlfriend, he often bragged to his friends about seeing or hooking up with other women, which Kat found out about, and when she confronted Chandler, he denied everything. She didn't buy it, she knew better, she began tracking his location on Snapchat. Not long after Chandler was caught in this lie about cheating on his girlfriend, he became more secretive towards everyone around him. No one really seemed to know the reason behind Chandler's abrupt switch. He actually ended up moving out of that apartment with his friends and back home to his parents' house. Again, no one knew why Chandler had become so secretive, and police couldn't help but question, did this secrecy have something to do with why his parents later disappeared? As detectives are trying to get a feel for this entire situation, this entire case that made absolutely no sense, they get a tip regarding some suspicious activity that Chandler had engaged in. This tip came from the owner of a farm just outside of town. She also happened to be a friend of Chandler's girlfriend, and she basically said that Chandler and his girlfriend had been out to her property on the 4th of July. They were all hanging out, and the next day, July 5th, Chandler came back to the farm, but this time he was alone. Chandler never mentioned or asked about coming back to this farm. The only reason she knew that he was there was because she saw his car backed into a field, and then he just walked out of the wood line. Which is very weird in any situation, but given the circumstances, detectives knew they needed to search this property and bring Chandler in for questioning. As deputies are scouring this farm looking for any sign of Krista and Bart, they bring in Chandler for an interview. And during this interview, Chandler tells detectives everything he's already mentioned up to this point. His parents went out to their cabin with some friends, and that was it. It was during this interview that deputies searching the farm located a male torso. Detectives interviewing Chandler told him he needed to come clean and tell them the truth about what had happened. They tell him they can't say what they know, but they know he is not telling the truth, and then Chandler immediately lawyers up, which ends the interview. Going back to the discovery of the male torso, this was in a wooded area near this property Chandler had been seen walking around. Near the torso, deputies found some scissors, pruning shears, and a bone saw. It looked like this is what had been used to dismember this body. All of these items had been found in an old oil drum. They also found a tarp in some garbage and a gun that was hidden in a barn. For the time being, Chandler was arrested for providing false information while they worked to identify the remains. The remains were in fact Bart's. He had been shot at least 2 times. However, Krista was nowhere to be found. Detectives immediately obtained a warrant to do a more thorough search of the Halderson home, where they found a shell casing in the basement as well as trace amounts of blood which had been cleaned up, but not thoroughly enough to avoid detection from luminol testing. They also found more evidence in the fireplace. They found that the glass fireplace had been broken, and inside there were nearly 200 bone fragments. Although they had all of this evidence, there was still no Krista, and at this point she was still a missing person, but that would quickly change when Chandler's girlfriend notified detectives, giving them information that would lead them to Krista's remains. If you remember, Chandler's girlfriend had been tracking him on Snapchat, so she allowed detectives to download her data and handed over a screenshot of Chandler's whereabouts from July 3rd. The screenshot showed that on July 3rd, Chandler's Bitmoji on Snapchat was located near the Wisconsin River. This location was very familiar to Chandler. It was a place he frequented, and it was at this location that detectives found Krista's remains. Chandler was charged with the murder of his mom and dad, as well as dismembering and hiding their bodies. This news left everyone in Chandler's life, including detectives, questioning him. He had everything going for him, a good job lined up, and he seemed to be very close with his family. Why would he want to throw everything away to murder his parents? This is when everyone learned why Chandler had been so secretive. As it turns out, Chandler had flunked out of school, and his job lined up with SpaceX was a lie. However, he did not tell anyone, not even his closest friends, that he had flunked out of school. And when his parents became suspicious and started asking to see his transcripts, Chandler created fake email accounts for school faculty and communicated directly with his parents through these fake emails to prove that he was still in school. And I don't think his parents were really buying it, because in June of 2021, Bart decided to call the school. He was pretending to be Chandler, and that is when he learned that Chandler wasn't in the IT program. In fact, he wasn't enrolled into any classes. On July 1st, 2021, Bart actually had plans to go to this college with his son, but it is believed that he and Krista were both killed on this day. In September 2021, Chandler Halderson pleaded not guilty to murdering, dismembering, and hiding the bodies of his parents, Bart and Krista Halderson. In January of 2022, his trial began, and the prosecution laid out the motive that Chandler murdered his parents all because they found he had been lying about his enrollment at school, as well as his job he had had lined up. The evidence they had against Chandler was overwhelming. They had video evidence of Chandler buying a tarp, and that tarp he purchased was very similar to the ones detectives found near where Bart's remains were located. Those cutting tools that were found in the oil drum had DNA that matched both Bart and Krista, and in my opinion, the most chilling piece of evidence was a video from a neighbor's security camera which showed light flickering in the window of the Halderson home. This light flickered for hours and led detectives and prosecutors to theorize that this flickering glow came from the fireplace where over 200 bone fragments were found. Chandler's girlfriend testified at the trial where she said she was working the day it was believed Krista and Bart had been killed, but the next day, July 2nd, Chandler asked her to bring over some cleaning supplies because he had cut himself on some glass when he broke the fireplace. She had no idea that Chandler had just killed his parents, and she never helped him clean anything up. Chandler was found guilty on all charges, and at his sentencing, he decided to provide a statement. One might think this is where you would show some kind of remorse, some kind of apology, but instead, he said he wished to appeal his conviction, and if any lawyer was listening, to reach out to him. He said it wasn't that he didn't have emotions, just that he was told not to show them due to the scrutiny of the case. Chandler was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and in April of 2023, 2 of Chandler's convictions related to hiding his parents' remains were vacated, but he still continues to serve a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the murder and dismemberment of his parents. This case is heartbreaking in the fact that Chandler decided to do this because his parents found out he was flunking out of college, his job that he had lined up was a lie, out of school is no reason to kill your parents.
This 11-year-old girl was held captive for 18 years and found alive. This is actually the case that got me into true crime when I was 11 years old. JC Lee Dugard was only 11 years old when she was walking to her school bus. A car pulled up next to her, grabbed her, and drove off with her. JC's stepfather actually witnessed her abduction, tried to get on his bike to go after the car that took his stepdaughter, but unfortunately was not fast enough. JC was abducted by this married couple, Philip and Nancy Garrido, and the hate I feel for these two people is... Nancy and Philip drove JC to their house over 100 miles away. And that is when Philip Garrido SA'd JC for the first time. The Garridos had a long rectangular property that they cut in half with a fence, so people thought that their property line ended before it actually did, and they kept JC in like that back half of the property with all these like tarps and sheds. JC spent most of her time alone and was only ever visited by Philip so he could SA her. It's so sad because JC had so many opportunities to be found. Philip was a known SA offender and on probation at the time, and a probation officer would come to the home and do like inspections of the house, never realizing that JC was being held captive in the backyard behind the fence. 2 years after JC was abducted, she got pregnant by Philip for the first time when she was only 13 years old. A few years after that, JC had her second daughter and tried her best to educate her 2 daughters with her 5th grade education. And again, this is just so heartbreaking, but I guess Philip's wife Nancy was insecure that JC was the mother of his children, like JC wanted to be there, being SA'd by her husband. So Nancy insisted that the 2 young girls would grow up thinking that Nancy was their mother and JC was just like their big sister. Philip Garrido was clearly very mentally unwell. He thought that angels were talking to him through the wall, and it only got worse when he started abusing hard substances. And he was actually convinced that God wanted him to take and SA little girls. And by 2009, Philip Garrido had convinced himself that he was being spoken to by God, that he was the chosen one and was meant to spread God's word. I feel like we gave parents who put their kids on leashes too much shit in the early 2000s because cases like the disappearance of 6-year-old Morgan Nick have me highly considering it when I'm a parent. The evening that 6-year-old Morgan Nick vanished, she went to a minor league baseball game with her mom, Colleen, and Colleen had always been very overprotective of all of her kids, so when 2 older children came over and asked if 6-year-old Morgan wanted to play, Colleen hesitated but reluctantly agreed because when she turned her head, she could see where they were playing. But during one of the moments when Colleen had her back turned, Morgan vanished. And really, the only thing that the 2 kids that Morgan was just playing with could remember was that a creepy man was just talking to Morgan right before she disappeared. And as the panic really started to sink in for Morgan's mom, Colleen, another adult called 911. And after speaking with witnesses, we had a description of the man that was last seen with Morgan. A man with dark hair in his 20s or 30s with a mustache and beard, and a description of his unique vehicle. A red truck with a white camper bed. Turns out the day and day after Morgan disappeared, there were other attempted abductions of little girls in the same area. In the first instance, earlier the same day that Morgan disappeared, a man tried to abduct a 4-year-old girl into his red truck but was thankfully stopped by her mother. And then the following day from Morgan's disappearance, 15 miles away, a man tried to get a 9-year-old girl to go into the men's bathroom of a convenience store with him. And then 2 months after Morgan disappeared, only 8 minutes away from where she was last seen, there was another failed abduction of a little girl, and this time an arrest was made. And yes, a red truck was involved.
Today's case is one of these cases that you'll most likely recognise like the famous mugshot from. So this here is 18-year-old Shaylin Moran. At the time of what she did, she was 18 years old, and this takes place in 2019. She was from a place called Pawtucket, which is in America, and in the fall of October 2019, she met a boy online who she started a relationship with. This boy was called Leonard Trowfield, and I couldn't find any photos of him for some reason. On the first day that they met in person, the pair stayed at Leonard's house. However, after day 4, the pair got into quite the argument, where Shaylin had stormed out of the house and filed a police report against Leonard. And she had called assault, which Leonard absolutely denied was not true. The pair were then given a no-contact order. And the reason why I'm kind of leaning to believe Leonard is, I'll tell you why. So obviously when you're given a no-contact order, you cannot contact that person. But this didn't bother Shaylin. She was sending death threats to absolutely all of his family, including his dog. So after the breakup, she then very quickly met Jack Doherty. And together they had conspired that they were going to kill Shaylin's ex. And Jack was absolutely down for that. He was so ready to do it. They were sending each other texts like, if you do this, we'll be together forever, I love you, and all that. And at the end of December 2019, so we're literally talking 2 months later, Jack came down from New York to see Shaylin. Not only this, he also brought an engagement ring with him, and the pair were ready to go to her ex's house to commit a shooting. So Shaylin had actually stayed in a hotel nearby where the pair were staying. She didn't go with him, and they decided that they were just going to shoot whoever opened the door. So on January 1st, 2020, Jack Doherty went to the address of Leonard, and it was his mother, Cheryl Smith, that opened the door, and she was shot several times, which killed her. Another strange thing that I just want to know, I couldn't find many photos of Cheryl either. To which, after it took place, they then posted this on Facebook, which says, "We some fighters and some shooters." And she's also showing off her engagement ring in the post. Luckily, a detective that was responding to the shooting had saw this post that these two had posted. So literally just a couple hours later, they were arrested in the hotel room, which I just think is kind of funny, to be honest. Like, how stupid do you have to be? And the cops found the gun that was used in the shooting that matched the bullets found in Cheryl. Jack Doherty is still in prison awaiting trial, but because Shaylin was really the mastermind behind it, she knew what she was doing. She was sentenced to life in prison for her part on killing Cheryl Smith.
The infamous Girl in the Box case has a scary new update. She was kidnapped and left in a box for 7 years, and the man responsible could be getting out of prison very shortly. It was the 1970s. 20-year-old Colleen Stan was planning on going from Oregon to California to attend a friend's birthday party, but that day her car didn't start. So she decided to hitchhike, which was a lot more common then than it is today in 2024. It was a long trip, but she hitched a ride from multiple cars and everything went smoothly, and it took her as far as they were going. Then a car full of rowdy young men pulled up next to Colleen and offered her a ride, and she just kind of got bad vibes and declined the ride. And the next car to pull up and offer Colleen a ride was a family, a young married couple and their little baby. What could be safer than that? So Colleen accepted and got in their car. And it would be a terrible mistake. Because that married couple was Cameron and Janice, and they had an agreement that Cameron could abduct and keep a young girl. Cameron kept Colleen in a box for years, only letting her out to cook or clean or be SA'd by him or be hurt, pretty much just to fulfill all of Cameron's sick desires. Cameron was actually able to convince Colleen that a huge underground organization called The Company was behind all of this, and if she ever tried to leave, her and her family would get hurt, and that Colleen was essentially his property now. He had her completely brainwashed. Eventually, he even let Colleen call her family and took her to visit them, pretending to be her fiance. He would let her go jogging, work at a hotel, because he knew that he had complete control over her. And the wife, Janice, was already pretty jealous about how much time her husband was spending with Colleen. So when Cameron came to her and said, "Hey, I want to abduct more girls and keep more girls," Janice had enough. Janice went to Colleen and told her that the stuff about The Company was a total lie and actually let her escape after 7 years in captivity. And then she turned her husband in. This really pisses me off, but let me know your opinion. Investigators never charged Janice with anything because they saw her as a victim of Cameron's as well. But Cameron was found guilty and sentenced to 104 years in prison. But he's recently been fighting for his release. And in August this year, so in just a few months, he has a hearing. He's going to sit in front of a jury and try to show them that he's not a threat to society anymore. And if he does it successfully, he will be getting out of prison very, very shortly.
In 2016, there were 5,712 reports of missing Indigenous women and girls in the United States. Out of those staggering numbers, the Department of Justice only logged 116 of those cases in their national database. And because of this extreme underreporting, it is nearly impossible to estimate how many Indigenous women and girls actually go missing or are murdered every year. Today, I want to discuss the case of 19-year-old Sonia Ivanoff. And Sonia grew up in a small Alaskan town. I really tried to look up the pronunciation, Unalakleet, Alaska. It was very small. She lived with her parents and 5 siblings. Her mom said she always put a spark into people's lives. Her brother said she was the one you went to when you wanted to be uplifted. In 2002, Sonia graduated high school and she knew she wanted to go to college in Hawaii, but she had to earn some money to save up. That's the thing about Sonia. She was determined and hardworking. She was willing to save up and spend a little time working in order to achieve her goals. So at 18 years old, Sonia and her best friend Timmery moved out to Nome, Alaska. It was about 145 to 150 miles from home, and her sister lived out there. She got a job working at a local hospital. It was great being closer to her sister and now living with her best friend. On the evening of August 10th, 2003, Sonia and Timmery were at a friend's house hanging out, and around 1 a.m., Sonia wasn't feeling well and was ready to leave. She went outside, and the last anyone saw her, she was walking down the street in the rain towards the apartment she and Timmery shared. Depending on the report you read, Sonia was heading towards the direction of the home, but she wasn't going home just yet. The reports say she was not feeling well. She was ready to go home and call it a night. But whatever Sonia's plans were, if she was directly going home or not, she never made it back home. On August 12, 2003, after calling Sonia's family, Timmery went to the local police department to report Sonia missing. She told officers the last time anyone had seen her was essentially the early morning hours of August 11th when Sonia left their friend's house to walk in the direction of their home. So after receiving this call, officers went to the apartment that Sonia and Timmery shared, and when they found that all of Sonia's belongings were still there, they knew it was serious. She wouldn't have just left without taking anything with her. That's the thing with a lot of cases where people go missing. You can tell when someone has not made any effort to collect their things before going somewhere, and I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, most people who don't have any reason to just up and leave not ditch their things and run off. What are they going to run off with? And in this case, police knew that the situation was not good, and they recognized that Sonia likely hadn't been home since she went to hang out with friends. Local police assembled a search and rescue team on August 13th. The entire community banded together, scouring the town looking for any sign of Sonia, and later that evening, the same day the search for Sonia began, someone located her body approximately 10 feet from an isolated road that was about 2 miles north of Nome. She was fully nude except for one sock. It had rained the night before, so she had essentially been washed clean of most, if not all, evidence. She did have a mark on her face like she had been hit, but other than that, there were no other apparent injuries. Because Nome was so small, they really didn't have the resources to properly investigate this case. They had to call in the Alaskan State Troopers, which would also give them access access to the crime lab. Alaskan state troopers were notified by 10:30 that evening, and they weren't expected to arrive until the next day. The Nome police were afraid it would rain again, or there was the possibility of animal activity destroying the scene, so they had to attempt to cover anything and everything to avoid losing any more possible evidence. When Sonia's family was notified, it was absolutely devastating. Her brother said that night the northern lights were so bright and the lowest he had ever seen them, it was as if his sister was dancing all around them. The next day, August 14th, the Alaskan state troopers arrived in Nome. Sonia was examined once again, and it was determined she had been shot in the head. The reason the Nome Police Department couldn't tell she had been shot was due to the thickness of her hair concealing the wound. The surrounding scene had a few pieces of evidence. There was a pool of blood in the road, some tire tracks, and a tree branch that had blue paint transfer, which meant it was possible the killer had driven out to the secluded area, taken Sonia's life, and had scratched their car on this tree branch. Sonia was flown to Anchorage for an autopsy, where it was determined she had in fact been killed from the gunshot wound to her head, which came from a .22 caliber weapon. While Sonia was being examined, investigators in Nome had to come up with a list of possible suspects and try to gather any information about who Sonia knew who might have done this to her, which wasn't easy because Sonia was very well liked and she didn't have any enemies. Investigators went back to her apartment where they found some photos and a videotape. In these photos, they found an image of Sonia with a bruise on her arm, and after speaking with Timmery, they learned Sonia had been wrestling around with a guy named Kunik, and that is how she received that bruise. Now, I tried to check. I don't know if they were legitimately wrestling around with each other in a playful way or what the situation was, but Kunik was known to have a short temper. He didn't have the best reputation, and oddly enough, he had a blue truck. A warrant was obtained to search Kunik's truck, where they found bloody sneakers as well as some guns and a blue tarp with a large amount of blood on it. While his truck was being searched, Kunik was brought in for questioning, where he claimed he hadn't seen or spoken to Sonia in over 2 weeks, and the blood found was from a recent hunting trip where he had killed a porcupine. He also claimed he wasn't alone during the hunt, so police tracked down his friend, who confirmed his story. They even showed investigators this porcupine they had killed, so everything seemed to be checking out. After a closer look, it was confirmed that the blood in his truck and on his sneakers was in fact animal blood, and the blue paint didn't match his truck either, so Kunik was cleared of any involvement. During this investigation, a local woman named Florence came forward to share with police information she had about the night Sonia was last seen. However, police never followed up with her about this information until they realized they didn't have any more leads to go on. And what police learned is this information Florence had about the night Sonia was last seen was vital information that would break the case wide open, and they should have followed up with her in the first place. According to Florence, she and a friend were sitting on their porch when they saw Sonia walk past them. Florence said hi, Sonia said hi back, but as Sonia continued to walk down the street, a police car approached her and slowed down. Sonia and this cop were talking, and then she got into his car and they drove off. This is a very, very small town. There were 7 police officers and a chief. On the night that Sonia was killed, only 2 of those officers were on duty, Stan Piscoya and Matthew Owens. Alaskan state troopers wanted to fly these 2 officers out to Anchorage to properly interview them and get them to take polygraph tests, but the night before they were scheduled to go out to Anchorage, a police car, number 321, suddenly went missing. This police car belonged to Officer Byron Redburn. He knew that he had not misplaced it. He figured some kids had stolen it to play a prank, and as he and some other officers were out looking for it, the police radio came on, and what do you know? It was Officer Matt Owens. He said that he had just located the stolen car. It was near a sand and gravel mine, and there had been shots fired. Someone was trying to shoot at him. Officers rushed to the scene, where they found Matt unharmed and no one else was there. It seemed very convenient that the night before he was supposed to go to Anchorage to be interviewed, this police car suddenly went missing, and he was the one to find it, and someone was trying to shoot him. Even more convenient, inside the passenger seat was an envelope. Inside that envelope was an ID card that belonged to Sonia and a threatening letter which indicated that whoever wrote it hated cops and Sonia was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was asked to reenact what exactly had happened. It was clear that whatever Matt was saying had happened was not adding up. Fellow officers knew that Matt had likely staged the scene to appear like the car was stolen because he just so happened to be the one who located it, and as he found the car, someone began shooting at him. They told him there was no way he would still be alive if all of this really happened. He would have definitely been shot. While Matt tried to maintain his innocence, police had enough evidence against him to arrest him. The bullet that had killed Sonia had this rare pattern, same rare pattern as a Jennings .22 pistol that Matt would have had access to in the police evidence room. They also got word from Matt's landlord that she saw Sonia's ID card and wallet in Matt's living room. Police also knew that sometime after Sonia was killed, Matt had been seen burning items in a burn pit. When that burn pit was examined, they found many items that had been on Sonia the night she was last seen, including some buttons from the brand of jeans Sonia was wearing. Police knew the brand of jeans Sonia was wearing because she had borrowed them from Timmery. After Matt Owens was arrested, many other women came forward to share their stories of how Matt Owens had sexually harassed them while he was on duty. He threatened to kill them if they ever said anything, and now that he was in custody, they were finally able to tell their story. With this information, police suspected that while Matt was on patrol that night, he saw Sonia, picked her up, and when she was in the car, he tried to ask her for sex. It was never officially determined if Sonia had been SA'd. However, police believe that Matt probably tried to, and when Sonia told him no, and maybe even told him she would tell, he decided to take her life. If you were to ask me my opinion, you don't just leave someone without clothes if you didn't SA them. But of course, because nothing has ever been confirmed, all I can do is speculate. November 4th, 2003, Matthew Owens was indicted on murder in the first degree, but the trial ended with a hung jury and it was declared a mistrial. Sonia's brother said he knew from the beginning that Nome was not the place to have the trial because a lot of those jurors attended the same church as Matt. They knew him. They didn't think he was capable of doing something like this, which in these cases, it is always that unsuspecting person. It is always that person in power who does things exactly like this. Because of the mistrial, the second trial was moved to Fairbanks, where he was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to 101 years in prison. In 2007, the Sonia Ivanoff bill was signed into law in Alaska, and this law mandates a maximum sentence for first-degree murder to any officer who murders someone on duty. Sonia was 19 years old. She had her entire life ahead of her. She was planning for her future. She was doing everything right, and this man who used his position of power to not only SA multiple other women took her life.